The rain had started long before sunrise, the kind of heavy, continuous rain that made people wake up feeling uneasy even before they opened their eyes. In the small riverside town, mornings were usually calm, filled with the sound of roosters and the smell of fresh tea. But on this day, the only sound was water pounding on rooftops, splashing against windows, and rushing through the narrow streets. No one expected it to turn into something dangerous. The town had seen strong rains before, but it had been years since anyone had worried about flooding. Lena stepped outside her small house and froze. Water already covered the ground up to her ankles. The sky looked thick and gray, like it was holding a weight it couldn't put down. The river that usually flowed gently behind the line of houses was now swollen, loud and wild. Her heart jumped. Her home was one of the closest to the water, and she knew that if the river rose even a little more, everything inside would be soaked. She rushed back inside, her clothes dripping. Her mother, who had been sorting some vegetables, looked up with concern. "How bad is it?" her mother asked. "It's coming fast. We need to move everything higher," Lena said, as she lifted the small carpet and rolled it up. They worked quickly, placing bags and clothes onto shelves and pushing furniture toward the walls. The water outside kept rising. The sound of it slapping against the house made everything feel even more urgent. By mid-morning, the river had spilled over completely. The street had turned into a brown, swirling stream. People shouted from there, porches warning each other, pulling children inside, tying belongings to prevent them from floating away. It was a scene none of them had expected to witness. As Lena struggled to pull a wooden stool onto the table, she heard a loud cracking sound from outside. She rushed to the doorway and saw a wave of water breaking through the side of the path, rushing directly toward her house like it had found an open gate. "What is that?" she whispered. Her eyes darted across the water, and that's when she noticed something that made her chest tighten with anger. Near the river's edge, where a small wooden barrier stood, she saw pieces of broken planks floating away. She recognized the style of the wood. It belonged to the small fence that Ravi had built a few months earlier. She had seen him work on it alone, hammering pieces together quietly while keeping his head down. He always worked silently, never speaking unless someone spoke to him first. Lena remembered asking him once why he built the barrier so close to the water, and he had simply replied, "To protect my home." But now, as water rushed through the gap where his wooden barrier had been, it looked to her as if the broken structure had redirected the flood toward the houses behind it, especially hers. Frustration boiled in her chest. By noon, the water had entered their home. Lena and her mother climbed onto the table with a few dry bags. The water around their legs was cold and muddy. All she could think about was how quickly everything had been destroyed and how she believed Ravi was the reason. He lived only a short walk away, though walking was not possible at the moment. The water level kept rising, and people had started gathering on the roofs of their houses. The town's elders were shouting instructions from a distance, trying to coordinate people to move to higher ground, but their voices were lost beneath the roaring water. By late afternoon, the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. Lena sat on the roof with her mother, shivering in the wind. Their home looked like a soaked clay wall barely standing under pressure. Something inside her snapped. "This wouldn't have happened if he didn't build that useless barrier," Lena said out loud. Her mother didn't answer. Perhaps she didn't agree, or perhaps she simply didn't have the energy to argue. But Lena wasn't done. She watched Ravi's little hut in the distance. It looked damaged too, but she didn't care at the moment. All she saw was the wooden structure he had built, and the path the water had taken straight into her home the next morning. Rain finally stopped, and the water began to slowly sink back. People climbed off their roofs and stepped into muddy streets. The smell of damp wood filled the air. Everyone had lost something. Some lost furniture, some lost clothes, some lost the little savings they kept hidden under their beds. The moment Lena's feet touched the wet ground, her anger returned. She saw Ravi near his hut, quietly picking up broken pieces of wood. He didn't look up. He didn't talk, simply worked. She walked straight toward him. "You caused this," she said. Her voice sharp. Ravi stopped what he was doing but didn't turn to face her. "Your barrier broke." "I saw it," Lena continued. "It pushed the water into the street, into my house. My home is ruined because of you." Other villagers gathered around them. Some looked unsure. Some nodded as if they had already been thinking the same thing. Ravi finally looked up, his face tired but calm. "I built it to stop the soil near my house from falling," he said softly. "I never wanted harm for anyone." "That's what you say now," Lena snapped. "If you hadn't touched the riverbank, none of this would have happened." A few people murmured in agreement. In times of disaster, finding someone to blame felt like a relief. It gave people a way to release their fear and frustration. Ravi didn't defend himself, simply lowered his head and continued gathering the broken pieces of wood. His silence only made Lena more frustrated. To her, it felt like he was hiding something. By afternoon, a small crowd had formed. The town elders decided they would hold a full meeting the next day to discuss the matter. Everyone was tired and covered in mud, but the anger lingered in the air. Lena tried to clean her home, though everything smelled like dirty water and rot. Papers were ruined, clothes were soaked, and the walls were covered in stains. Each ruined item reminded her of what had happened, and each reminder strengthened her belief that Ravi was responsible. But deep inside, hidden beneath her frustration, there was a quiet, unspoken fear. A fear that she wasn't truly angry at Ravi, she was angry at the helplessness she had felt during the flood. Angry that she couldn't protect the things she had worked so hard for. Angry that nature had taken everything without warning. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside. Blaming him felt easier. That evening, the whole town moved slowly, exhausted. People gathered outside their damaged homes, sharing stories of what they had lost. Some cried quietly. Some simply stared at the muddy ground. From her doorway, Lena watched Ravi walk alone toward the riverbank. He carried a small shovel and a few tools. He didn't seem bothered by the stares he received. He didn't seem angry at the accusations. He simply walked with the same calm silence he always carried. It irritated her even more. How can he be so calm after ruining so many homes? She whispered to herself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the town grew quiet. Families huddled around small lamps, drying their belongings, trying to salvage anything that wasn't completely damaged. Lena couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the floodwater rushing into her home. She saw the broken pieces of Ravi's barrier floating past her door. She saw the way he looked down when she accused him, never defending himself. Her chest tightened with frustration. The next morning, people gathered in the open area near the old banyan tree. The elders sat in a circle, while the townspeople formed a larger circle around them. Lena stood near the front, her arms crossed. Ravi stood alone on the opposite side. One of the elders spoke. "We are here to understand what caused the flood to enter our homes so quickly. Some believe the wooden barrier played a part. We must hear everyone." Several villagers began speaking one after another. Some supported Lena's claim. Some hesitated. Others said they weren't sure. When it was Ravi's turn, he stepped forward slowly. He didn't look frightened or angry, just tired. "I built the barrier to protect my home," he said quietly. "I live close to the water. The soil was falling, and I worked with what I had. The rain was stronger than anyone expected. The water came from many directions. I'm sorry for the hurt, but I didn't mean for this to happen." Lena clenched her jaw. His calmness felt like an excuse to her, before she could speak again. Another voice rose from the back. It was Naveed, the schoolteacher. He had been observing the riverbank since morning, but no one knew why. For now, he said, "I think we should wait before deciding anything. I've noticed something upstream, something that doesn't match the direction of the water." Everyone turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" an elder asked. "I'm not sure yet," Naveed said. "Ought I need a little time to check. Please don't make a decision today." People exchanged confused glances. Lena frowned. She didn't understand why he wanted to delay things. The elders talked among themselves and finally agreed to wait one more day. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Lena stood still, her frustration mixing with confusion. She didn't know what Naveed had seen, but she didn't like the idea of waiting. Ravi walked past her quietly, not meeting her eyes. For a moment, she wondered why he never fought back, never raised his voice, never defended himself like others would. But she pushed the thought aside again. As she stood there, watching the muddy ground, she had no idea that the truth waiting to be uncovered would change everything she believed about the flood and about Ravi. The morning after the town meeting began with a quiet heaviness. the kind that made everyone walk a little slower and speak a little softer. The sky was pale, and the clouds looked as if they wanted to cry again but were too tired. The floodwater had mostly pulled back into the river, leaving behind mud, broken furniture, and a long list of things people needed to fix. It had also left behind questions that hung in the air like smoke. Ravi left his hut before most people were awake. His clothes were still damp from the day before, and his tools were rusty from being soaked in the floodwater. He held them tightly anyway, as if gripping them could keep him steady. He knew the whole town believed he was responsible for the destruction. Even those who hadn't spoken openly were watching him with suspicion, but he didn't argue. He never had. His life had been full of moments where people misunderstood him or judged him quickly. Staying quiet had always felt easier than trying to explain. He walked toward the riverbank again, stepping over branches and small pools of muddy water. His hut had survived only because he had built it with thicker wood, even though people teased him for it at the time. Now it looked battered, but it still stood. As he reached the river's edge, he saw more damage than he had noticed before. Large chunks of soil had been washed away. Stones that had once lined the shore were scattered everywhere. He knelt down and picked up a handful of wet mud, letting it drip from his fingers. The river looked calmer now, but he could still feel the force it had carried just a day ago. He wished he had the right words to explain himself to the town, but words had never come easily to him. Across the town, Lena was already awake. Her home smelled of damp earth and the slightly sour smell that came from wet clothes and ruined papers. She had barely slept, tossing and turning as she thought about everything she had lost. She also kept replaying her argument with Ravi in her mind. Each time, her frustration hardened, like a knot tightening. She walked outside and saw her neighbors sweeping mud from their doorsteps. Some waved at her weakly. Others had their heads down, too tired to talk. The flood had taken something from everyone. Lena spotted her mother trying to dry some blankets on a rope. She hurried to help. "Don't pull too hard," her mother said softly. "It might tear." "I know," Lena replied, though her hands were shaking slightly. "Everything's ruined. I don't even know where to start." Her mother glanced at her carefully. "It will get better. It always does." But Lena didn't feel hopeful. She felt empty, angry, and unsure of how to rebuild everything she had lost. Later in the morning, she walked toward the center of the town, hoping to speak with some of the elders again. She still didn't understand why Naveed had asked everyone to wait. What could he possibly have seen that changed anything? When she reached the open area, she saw a few elders already seated on benches made from old logs. They looked as exhausted as everyone else. "Is the meeting happening today?" Lena asked. One of the elders shook his head. "Not yet. We will wait for Naveed. He said he needed to check something upstream." Lena frowned. "Do we even know what he's looking for?" "No," the elder replied. "But he seems certain that there was more to understand." Lena walked away, feeling uneasy. She didn't like waiting, and she didn't like not knowing. She wanted answers. She wanted someone to take responsibility for what had happened. Meanwhile, Naveed was already far upstream. He had left early, carrying a notebook and a long stick to test the ground as he walked. The riverbank was uneven, and some parts were still slippery from the flood. He carefully studied every part of the land, kneeling from time to check the soil, touching the surface with his fingertips, and examining the flow of the remaining water. At one point, he stopped and stared at a deep cut in the land. It wasn't natural. It looked carved, like a large shovel or machine had scraped through it. The soil around it had collapsed from the heavy rain. Leaving a sharp drop that didn't belong to the natural river shape, he scribbled something in his notebook and continued. Back in town, people tried to return to their daily routines even though nothing felt normal. Children walked barefoot in the mud, picking up broken toys or small objects the water had washed away. Women scrubbed pots and pans, trying to get rid of the dirt that clung to everything. Men gathered pieces of wood to repair fences and rebuild walls. Lena found herself wandering toward the river again, unable to stay still. She didn't want to see Ravi, but she couldn't stop herself from looking toward his side of the river. When she reached the riverbank, she froze. Ravi was there, kneeling in the mud, repairing the remaining pieces of the wooden barrier he had built. His face was calm, but his hands moved slowly. As if every movement hurt, Lena felt the anger she had carried for days begin to rise again. Her memories of the flood crashing into her home returned sharply, like a wound being reopened. "You're fixing it?" she asked, her voice sharp. Ravi didn't look up immediately. When he did, he nodded once. "It broke during the rain," he said softly. "I know it broke," Lena replied. "I saw it wash away, and I saw the water rush straight into the street because of it." Ravi lowered his eyes again. "I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough," Lena said. "You ruined everything we had." He didn't respond. He simply continued placing the wooden planks together. His silence frustrated her even more. She wanted him to defend himself, to argue back so she could release all the frustration that had built up inside her. But instead, he stayed quiet, making her anger feel pointless. Before she could say anything more, a voice called out from a distance. "Lena." She turned and saw one of her neighbors approaching. "The elders want everyone to gather at the banyan tree in an hour." "Naveed is back." Lena's heart jumped slightly. She didn't want to admit it, but she hoped he had proof that supported her claim. She hoped he had found something that made her anger feel justified. "Fine," she said. "I'll be there," when the neighbor walked away. Ravi spoke for the first time in a long while. "I didn't want anyone to suffer," he said quietly. "I only built this because I live close to the water. It was never meant to harm you." Lena crossed her arms. "Then why didn't you speak up properly at the meeting?" Ravi looked at the muddy ground. "People usually don't listen to me." She stared at him for a moment, unsure how to respond. There was a sadness in his tone she hadn't heard before. But she didn't allow herself to soften. Not yet. When the hour passed, the town gathered once again at the banyan tree. Everyone looked anxious, tired, and uncertain. The air felt heavy with expectation. Naveed stepped forward, holding his notebook. His clothes were damp and there was mud on his shoes, showing how far he had walked. "I went upstream," he began, his voice steady but serious. "I found something unusual. Something that doesn't match the idea that the flood came only from rain." People murmured among themselves. "What did you find?" one of the elders asked. Naveed opened his notebook. "I found a large section of the riverbank that has been dug out. The soil was removed recently, and not by hand. It looks like it was done with tools or machines." The crowd gasped. Lena felt her stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" someone asked. "It means the shape of the river was changed," Naveed replied. "When the rain came, the water followed a new path. A path it wasn't supposed to take. That's why it rushed toward town so suddenly." A wave of confusion spread through the crowd. "So Ravi's barrier didn't cause it?" another villager asked. Naveed shook his head. "The barrier was small. It couldn't have changed the direction of the water like that. Whatever happened upstream is much bigger." Lena felt her face flush with heat. She didn't know if it was embarrassment, fear, or confusion. She turned slowly toward Ravi. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, looking down at his feet. He didn't look relieved. He didn't look proud. He looked tired in a way that made Lena's heart feel unexpectedly heavy. The elders whispered among themselves. "We need to find out who dug the riverbank." One of them said people began discussing possibilities. Some suspected workers who collected sand. Others wondered if someone upstream had tried to redirect water for farming, but Lena was no longer listening. She was staring at Ravi, replaying every harsh word she had thrown at him. Every moment she had stood in front of him with anger in her voice. Every time he had looked down instead of arguing back. Her chest felt tight. When the meeting ended, people began heading home, speaking in low voices about the new information. Lena walked slowly toward Ravi, who was still standing under the tree. Quietly observing the ground, she opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't know how to begin. She didn't want to admit she may have been wrong, but before she could say anything, Ravi spoke first. "It's all right," he said gently. "I understand why you were upset." His words cut deeper than anger ever could. Lena swallowed hard. I didn't know." Ravi nodded slowly. "None of us did." He began to walk away, leaving her standing beneath the banyan tree, unsure of what to do with the guilt quietly spreading in her chest. The day ended with more questions than answers. The flood was no longer just a natural disaster. Something bigger was hiding beneath the muddy surface. The truth was only beginning to come into view. The night after the meeting felt longer than any night before it. Even though the rain had stopped and the river had calmed, the entire town carried a thick layer of worry that refused to settle. The truth Navid shared had shaken everyone, yet it also left them with more questions than answers. If someone had really dug into the riverbank upstream, then who was behind it? And why would anyone do something that could put an entire town at risk? Lena walked home slowly, her steps sinking into the soft mud. The lantern she carried swung gently in her hand, casting shaky shadows along the path. Her mind felt heavy. Every thought seemed to pull another question behind it. She hadn't meant to hurt Ravi so deeply with her accusations. But she had. She had done it in front of the whole town. And worst of all, he hadn't said anything back, not a word. That silence now echoed louder in her mind than the day of the flood, as she stepped into her home. She found her mother sitting near a small lantern, trying to sew a torn piece of cloth. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, as if she were afraid the fabric would fall apart completely. "You're late," her mother said softly. "I stayed behind for a bit," Lena replied. "Just needed some air." Her mother looked up at her, studying her expression. "You look troubled. Did something happen?" Lena hesitated before answering. I might have misjudged someone." Her mother nodded gently, as if she already knew. "It happens, especially when we're scared. Fear makes us see only the closest explanation, not the right one." Lena sat down beside her. "But I was so sure. I didn't even listen to him." "Sometimes listening is hard when our heart is hurting," her mother said. "Go easy on yourself. And when you're ready, make things right." Lena didn't answer. She lowered her head, staring at her muddy shoes. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ravi's tired expression under the banyan tree. His voice, quiet and gentle, replayed in her memory. Morning arrived too early. With pale sunlight slipping through the cracks in the walls, the air smelled of damp soil. The sounds of people beginning their day drifted through the street, soft sweeping. Water being poured into buckets. Quiet conversations about rebuilding. Lena stepped outside and took a deep breath. She knew she had to face Ravi. She didn't know what she would say, but doing nothing felt worse. She walked toward the riverbank, wiping her hands nervously against her clothes. When she reached the edge, she saw him standing near the broken barrier again. He held a wooden pole in his hand, measuring the depth of the eroded soil. He heard her footsteps and looked up. His eyes didn't hold anger. They held something far quieter, something harder to face. "Ravi?" she began, her voice soft. He lowered the pole and waited, giving her the space to speak. "I wanted to say—" "I'm sorry," Lena said, her words trembling slightly. "I blamed you without knowing the truth. I shouted at you, and you didn't deserve that." Ravi looked down at the water for a moment before replying, "It's all right." But his voice didn't sound like it was truly all right. "No," Lena said quietly. "It's not. You worked so hard on this barrier. I saw you build it, and I treated you like you did something wrong." He didn't move. He didn't even blink. The stillness made Lena feel even more guilty. "You didn't argue with me," she said after a moment. "Why? Why didn't you say anything when I blamed you?" Ravi finally looked up, his eyes tired. "People don't usually listen when they're angry. I didn't want to make things worse." His simple answer made her chest ache. Before either of them could say more, loud footsteps approached from the left. It was Navid, carrying his notebook again. "Both of you," he said, slightly out of breath. "I need your help." They exchanged surprised looks. "What happened?" Lena asked. "There's something upstream you should see," Navid replied. "I found more than I told the elders yesterday, but I didn't want to say it without being completely sure." Ravi stood straighter. "What did you find?" Navid lowered his voice. "There's a path, a hidden one. It leads away from the river. And there are marks, heavy marks. like something was dragged or pushed across the ground. Lena felt a chill run through her arms, as if someone moved equipment. Exactly, Naveed said. But the area is difficult to reach alone. I need the two of you to come with me. I think something important is there. Ravi nodded immediately. Lena hesitated, but then nodded too. They followed Naveed up the side of the river, stepping carefully around slippery rocks and broken tree branches. The climb was steep, and the ground felt soft beneath their feet. The further they walked, the quieter the town behind them became, until only the sound of the river and rustling leaves remained. After nearly half an hour of walking, Naveed stopped. Here, he said. Lena looked around. At first, she saw only thick bushes and scattered stones. Then, as she stepped closer, she noticed a long trail carved into the soil. It was deeper than any animal could create. The edges were rough, and the center was packed down, as if something heavy had rolled over it repeatedly. Naveed pointed. Look at the direction. It leads from the riverbank toward the small forest area. Ravi crouched down, touching the compacted soil with his fingers. This wasn't made by rain, Naveed agreed. And there's more. He led them a few steps further, pushing aside branches until they reached a clearing. In the center lay a large wooden frame, half buried in mud. It looked old, but recently disturbed. Pieces of rope were tied around it, and the ends were frayed. What is that? Lena whispered. It's part of a water channel, Naveed said. A man-made one. Someone was trying to redirect the river earlier. Maybe for farming. Maybe for something else. But when the heavy rain came, the unfinished channel collapsed, and the water rushed straight into the town. Lena felt her lungs tighten. So it really wasn't the barrier at all. Ravi stood silently beside her, and the person who dug this, Naveed continued, they knew what they were doing. This isn't random digging. This is deliberate planning. Who would do this? Lena asked. Naveed sighed. I have a guess, but I need proof. If I am right, then this wasn't a mistake. It was done for someone's personal gain. The weight of his words settled over them like fog. They returned to town slowly, their minds heavy with what they had seen. The truth was more complicated than anyone had imagined. When they reached the riverbank again, Lena turned to Ravi. I didn't know any of this, she said softly. I didn't either, he replied. She hesitated. Can you forgive me? He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded gently. We all make mistakes. His forgiveness felt like a warm breath in the cold morning air. But beneath their quiet moment, something far bigger was growing. Whoever had dug that hidden channel had caused the flood. And if Naveed was right, it wasn't an accident. As the day went on, people continued cleaning, unaware that a deeper truth was waiting to surface. The flood wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a consequence of someone's choices. Choices made in secret, and now, that secret was beginning to rise from the mud. He stood there in the faint morning light, sure of what waited ahead. I'm sure of how the day would unfold. The storm had already passed, yet the air still carried the sharp smell of wet mud and broken branches. As he looked toward the damaged fields, he felt a small pull in his chest, not of fear, but something like a quiet duty he could not shake. She woke up with a pounding in her head. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the river rising, the water swallowing the road, the sound of cries in the dark. And every time she thought of it, her anger returned. She didn't even want to see him today, yet she knew she had no choice. Villagers were already outside, walking around with tools, checking fences, trying to see what could be saved. Everyone wore the same tired expression. A flood leaves more than destruction behind. It leaves a strange emptiness, a pause in life. She walked toward the riverbank with slow steps. Even after hours of calm, the water still rushed fast, as if it had a mind of its own. She stopped near a broken patch of soil and took a shaky breath. He arrived a few minutes later. He didn't want to disturb her, so he stood a short distance away, his boots sinking a little in the softened ground. He wasn't sure if she noticed him, but it didn't matter. He came because he had something important to say. She finally turned slightly, just enough to show she knew he was there. She didn't greet him. She didn't look directly at him either. But she didn't walk away. He took that as permission. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly. She didn't respond, so he walked closer. Just a few steps, giving her enough space to step back if she wished. She didn't. "I know you blame me," he said. His voice trembled a bit. "You should blame me. I made mistakes. And I didn't step up when I should have. But there's something you don't know." Her jaw tightened. She didn't want excuses. She didn't want him to soften his guilt. "Not now," she said. "I'm too tired for another story." He nodded. He understood. Yet he continued anyway, because this time the truth mattered more than his fear. "I didn't open the gate early enough. That's true. But it wasn't because I didn't care. The river sensors were faulty. The alert didn't come through. I didn't find out until it was already too late. And I tried to fix the gate manually, but the handle jammed. I nearly got pulled in when the water finally burst through. I didn't want anyone else to worry, so I didn't tell the whole thing." She turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable. "You should have said something," she whispered. "I know. And I'm sorry. I thought silence would protect everyone, but it only made things worse. I want to help fix it now. I truly do." She stayed quiet for a long moment. Too long, he began to think she might walk away. But then she spoke. "You think saying this now will fix everything?" He swallowed. "No, I don't, but it's a start." She stared at the river again. The rushing water reflected the morning sun in a way that made everything look too sharp. Painfully sharp. "People lost homes," she said. "Some lost everything they owned. Do you know how many came to my door last night asking for help? Asking for answers? I can't give them answers if the people responsible hide the truth." He lowered his head. "I understand. Do you?" She asked quietly. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't trust himself to say the right thing. She sighed. "I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm not ready for that. But we need to rebuild now. And that means we can't keep fighting like this. Not today. Not when everyone else needs us." He nodded slowly. "Then let me help. Tell me what to do." It was the first time in days she looked directly at him. Her eyes were tired, but not cold. "Start with the lower path," she said. "People need a safe route to cross. The ground there is unstable." He understood immediately. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the lower path, determined to prove he could be useful. She watched him go, her chest tightening with a mix of emotions she didn't want to name. Anger, yes. Disappointment, yes. But something else, too something, she couldn't quite face. Minutes later, she headed toward the village center. Several families were sitting outside one of the damaged houses, their clothes still damp, their belongings piled in small, pathetic heaps. A little girl sat on the steps, hugging her knees. Her mother tried to comfort her, but the exhaustion in the woman's face said everything. She knelt beside the child. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly. The girl shook her head. "Just scared," she whispered. "It's okay to be scared," she said gently. "But you're not alone. Everyone is here with you." The girl looked up at her, eyes full of trust she didn't feel she deserved at that moment. "Is the river mad at us?" the child asked, her heart squeezed. "No, sweetheart. Rivers don't get mad. Sometimes nature just changes faster than we can prepare for. But we'll make it safe again. I promise." The woman beside them nodded gratefully. She stood again and continued moving through the village, listening to people, offering small comfort where she could. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the riverbank, to the words he had spoken. Was he telling the full truth, or only the parts that made him look less guilty? She couldn't tell. She wanted to believe him, but trust was not something she gave easily anymore. By noon, the sun was high, drying the mud but leaving behind a heavy smell that lingered in the air. She joined a group clearing debris near the schoolhouse. Each broken plank and fallen branch reminded her of the night everything changed. Hours passed. The village worked like a single body, tired, slow, but determined. Then someone shouted her name. She looked up and saw one of the farmers running down the slope. "Come quick," he yelled. "The slope is giving way. He's down there." Her heart froze. She dropped what she was holding and ran. The closer she got, the clearer the situation became. The lower path had softened too much. The mud had shifted and he was trapped halfway down the edge. Struggling to pull himself up while the soil crumbled beneath him, for a moment she couldn't breathe. Several villagers rushed toward him, but they were too far. He slipped again, sliding downward as loose mud followed him. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just ran. By the time she reached the edge, her hands were already grabbing the nearest rope. "Hold on," she called out. He looked up, his face streaked with dirt and fear. "Don't come closer," he shouted. "It's too unstable. Just hold on," she said again, louder this time. She secured the rope around a thick tree root, then lay flat on her stomach and threw the other end toward him. He reached for it, but slipped again, mud soaking his arms. "Grab it," she yelled. He tried again, and this time he caught it. She dug her heels into the ground and pulled with all her strength. Her muscles burned. Her arms shook. The villagers behind her rushed to help, grabbing the rope and pulling with her. Slowly, far too slowly, he inched upward, when his hand finally reached the solid ground. She grabbed his wrist without hesitation. The villagers pulled again, harder this time, and within seconds he was up on the path, breathing heavily. Mud covering every inch of him. He lay there for a moment, chest rising and falling fast. She knelt beside him, trying to catch her own breath. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He shook his head weakly. "I'm okay, you shouldn't have come down here." She didn't respond. She was still trying to steady her heartbeat. He sat up slowly, wincing, but when he looked at her, something changed in his eyes. A deep realization, a quiet gratitude. "You saved me," he whispered. She looked away. "No one else was close enough," she said softly. He shook his head. "That's not why you ran." She didn't answer. Villagers gathered around them. Some checked for injuries. Others helped him stand. But she stood still, staring at the broken edge of the slope. The truth she had avoided was now too clear. She didn't hate him. Not anymore. And that scared her more than the flood ever did. The sun dipped behind the hills as the day neared its end. And while the village stood in ruins, something fragile and new was beginning to shift between them. She didn't know if she was ready for it, but the truth, like the river, had already started to carve its way through everything. Morning after the landslide scare arrived, with a strange stillness, as if the whole village was holding its breath. The birds were quiet, the river gentler, and even the wind moved softly over the damp fields. It was the kind of silence that came only after days of chaos. It's the kind that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. She stepped outside her home, stretching her sore arms. Her clothes from yesterday still lay draped over the chair, stained with mud and panic. She didn't want to look at them. She didn't want to remember the feeling of pulling him up from the edge. Her heart pounding so hard she could barely think, but the memory stayed anyway. Today was the day. The village elders would gather again, this time not to accuse anyone, not to argue, but to finally face the truth. The real truth. She walked toward the open yard near the old banyan tree, where meetings were usually held. As she approached, she saw people already gathering: farmers, shopkeepers, children sitting on the ground. Faces still looked tired, but there was a new expression mixed in. Expectation, maybe even hope. He was there too. He stood a little away from the crowd, speaking quietly with one of the elders. His clothes were clean today, but the bruises from yesterday's fall were still visible on his arms. When he noticed her approaching, he paused for a second and then gave a small nod. She nodded back. No anger. No blame. Just a silent understanding neither of them could explain yet. The eldest elder lifted his hand, calling everyone to settle. Today he began, his voice strong despite his age. "We talk about what really happened the night of the flood. No more assumptions. No more pointing fingers. We have been given new information, and we must face it with clear minds. The crowd murmured. She felt her stomach tighten. She knew what was coming. The schoolteacher stepped forward next, holding a folder of documents. He had spent days collecting evidence, waking up early, walking upstream, questioning workers who finally agreed to talk. Many of you still believe the flood was caused by the barrier near the river, he said. But that is not true. Look at these photos. He held up pictures taken upstream, deep cuts in the riverbed, piles of removed sand, broken equipment left behind. This, he continued, was done by the contractor without permission. He dug out the deeper sections to collect sand and sell it. This changed the water path. It made the river faster and unstable. And when the heavy rain came, everything collapsed. A wave of shock spread through the crowd. Someone whispered, "So that's why the water rose so fast." Another murmured, "We blamed the wrong person." Her throat tightened. The contractor stood nearby, guarded by 2 officers. His head was lowered, his hands shaking. He didn't try to deny anything. The eldest elder turned to the villagers. "We must remember this day. We must learn that truth takes time. Fear makes us jump to conclusions. But fear cannot guide us anymore." Then he looked toward him, the man everyone had doubted. "You did not cause this," the elder said, "and we owe you an apology." The entire crowd fell silent. He lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't someone who enjoyed standing in front of others. But today, he didn't step back. He looked up slowly, his voice soft but steady. "I only did what I thought was right. I made mistakes. I didn't speak up earlier, but I didn't harm anyone on purpose. I love this village as much as all of you do." A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes.